Hey everybody, welcome to Obscurities in Miniature. And today I wanted to talk to you about a new set of figure designers that I've come across, and that is Daybreak Miniatures. Now, they've been putting out a few releases on Patreon so far, and the one that really first caught my eyes, and the one that I wanted to start things off with here today, were their Paladin Knights. And I gotta say, I was quite impressed with the amount of filigree and detail work going into their armor. And yes, I know it's not the world's greatest print, but you can see there's a lot of fun textures and details going on with this armor. And it is quite elaborate. You're gonna like the cloak as well. He's a big dude, in addition to that, and that's kind of what I was hoping. Grabbing some other Paladin Knights that I've got handy. You can see here, while he may not have the bulk going across his shoulders that both the Stormcast and the Paladins from Artisan Guild have, he definitely at least has the height. And I mean, overall, the thickness, he's in a very straightforward pose. But in addition to those guys, they've released a whole slew of other races, including some very Warcraft-inspired orcs. So I tried printing one of those guys up, and I feel like he's a lot more along the lines of what to look for in a big, bulky miniature. Now I've just got him blue tacked. Funny enough, I haven't even actually glued this guy yet. His arms aren't even attached. These are a separate piece. We'll get into that later. A lot of the models come in multiple pieces, pretty easily put together. The attachment points work pretty well. But before I get into a little bit of nitpicky stuff there, just figure I'd show you guys how they compare with some other orc models. Got a GW one right there. Conquest one right here. So they have that nice middle ground, I think, between the two of them. I don't even know what kind of other orcs there are out there these days. At least that matter in terms of fantasy. I've got Avatars of War. My turtle friend, he's a bit larger, but he's just doing his own thing here anyway. Why he's wearing a turtle shell and a skull beats me. But this guy also has a little top knot that I didn't bother to attach yet. But again, details looking pretty sharp. I would imagine after priming these, they're going to look pretty slick. The detail is definitely there, and even though I've got the blue tack in there, parts look like they're going to fit really nicely. But what I actually did spend a bit more time on, which is funny because I'm not like the biggest fan, but I ended up printing up a bunch of their dwarves actually. And one of the things that struck me the most is they've actually got somewhat proportioned bodies. Look, there's legs, and I know that's almost heretical for some people because basically dwarves are just giant heads with little feet sticking out underneath the beards in some circles, but and I can understand that. There's definitely a time and a place for that. But I liked the fact that these were quite heavily armored and armed dwarves. I guess they do have a bit of that Warcraft inspiration there as well. It's pretty easy to say that's had a major influence in fantasy art in the last few years. Funny enough, I never really got into World of Warcraft. I played the old strategy games, but I was immediately turned off by the idea of having to pay a monthly subscription to something that I wasn't ever sure if I'd get around to playing, so didn't really do much there. Now this guy's on a 25mm, this one's on a 30. Some of the poses are a little bit wider than others, so something to keep aware of. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about with those multiple parts and modular pieces, so here we have a couple examples. I really dig this guy. This is probably next up in my painting queue of dwarves to paint. Very heroic looking. And there's always a soft spot for the grizzled bald guys. Balding guys. Widow's Peak guys. So, you can see neither of them have any arms, so that's because they do have a couple of options. Mostly shields and various hammers. And other close combat weapons. For whatever reason, I tried printing this hammer right here 3 different times, and I could not get it to print Even when I tried to support it myself, different spots, same mistake. So I gave up. It's close enough. I don't think most people are going to make a huge issue out of it. But here's where things get interesting. So the fact that we have all these really, for lack of a better term, modular parts, they're not really modular, unfortunately. And I think that might be something for Daybreak Miniatures to consider in the future. Is you've gone to the lengths of cutting these models nicely and, you know, to make sure that everything works out. But it's like, if the cuts were just in different parts, in different spots on the arms, everything would be totally compatible and it would be fantastic. So you can see here, like this arm, it just cuts off right above the wrist, whereas this one's almost at the shoulder. You know, to me, that's like a quick fix, and none of these are like single piece prints, so that's not going to be an issue. I think that's his hand. It looks like it should be his hand. I'll have to double check. There's a couple other random hands laying around here, so it's hard to say whose. Maybe this guy's supposed to have 2 axes. Wouldn't surprise me. See, that looks right, but then if you grab like this hand with the shield, then he's got a really, really, really long arm. It just doesn't look right. Which is a shame. I think just, you know, if they cut things a little bit different, I think you've got a whole case for nice modular troops, and who doesn't like to have modular figures, right? In fact, I liked the design so much, I went ahead and actually just quickly painted one up the other day. I think they painted up pretty decently. I will revel in my mediocrity in terms of painting. I think from a distance, it gets the job done. I've got kind of a funky angle there. But matching these guys up with some of the other dwarven models out there will give you a good idea of what to expect. The Oathmark stuff, you know, the bases, they're going to be an issue. I think if they're rebased, they're still a little bit shorter, but, you know, they're meant for nice rank and file. So it might be nice to have them as a standout hero. Plus, with the joys of 3D printing, you could always shrink them down to maybe, say, 85% if you wanted to have them more in line with other models. Grabbing a Stonehaven model here. Same thing. Of course, this is a female one. I think it's a dwarf. I've used her as a dwarf. Maybe she's a halfling, but then she wouldn't have shoes. Or a gnome. No, I'm going to say dwarf. But anyway, again, a little bit of a difference in size. I think if you wanted to have them blend in with more Stonehaven stuff, and they put out some cool dwarves, I would definitely probably shrink these down a little bit. Going with a WizKids Deep Cuts. Honestly, I think they're pretty much good as is. I think if they were blended into a warband or an adventuring party, it wouldn't look too out of place with each other. GW stuff, I think they're going to fit in quite nicely. I don't think you need to change much in terms of scale. I'm looking, I thought I had a Mantic guy. Well, it's a Chaos. Abyssal Dwarf. Which you can't see. He's a little bit shorter, and I know I had a metal one here somewhere in front of me, and it's like totally escaping my eyes. Seriously? Fine, we'll keep looking. Durgan's Paint Forge. Another fine purveyor of dwarven models. They've got some very interesting sculpts. You probably could get away with keeping it at the same size with a typical GW human here. With a Titan Forge printed dwarf. I'd say they're pretty close. The Daybreak guy has a bit of an actual pronounced lower region of his body and actual legs versus the Titan Forge guy just kind of having some stumpy things to put around on. Yeah, here we go with a Reaper Dwarf again. Same thing. The legs obviously are a lot more pronounced on these guys. Much more obvious. I wish I knew where I put Balthazar Bamfist from Riot Quest. Would have been a good one to compare to. So while the styles may be different aesthetically, I think there are some definite uses for these guys. And it's driving me nuts. I'm like just stalling right now trying to find this stupid dwarf. It was a Slayer, a Mantic Slayer. And I have no idea where... Man, you know what? As soon as I turn this off, I'm sure it's going to pop up right in front of me and it'll be like, duh. Ay, ay, ay. Oh, well. Another interesting thing, and I haven't had a chance to check it out yet, is the fact that Daybreak has some nice-looking Chaos Warriors and Beastmen. So I'm hoping to give those a spin in the near future and see how those turn out. But overall, I gotta say, model quality, quite nice. Just my biggest critique at this point would be maybe rethink where some of these models get cut, because I think they're doing themselves a little bit of a disservice in not allowing for true modularity between all of their pieces. I think there's definitely the potential there for even more growth and customization options. And for most tabletop players, most, I say, that's always going to be a good thing. I know there's a few strange ones out there who are like, I don't want options, but I'm not one of them, so you're not going to ever hear that from me. Oh, here's a random... That's a Slayer, but it's not my Mantic Slayer. That's an Avatars of War guy. He's a little shorter, though. There's the Mantic one. I finally found him! And he's a bit squatter. What do you know? So, at least with these guys, you do have that luxury of tweaking things to your liking. And that's always going to be a plus. I want to say that they had options available for some of these models to have pre-supported versions scaled up for like 54 or 75 millimeter if you're into the big, elaborate character pieces, if you're into that kind of stuff. Not the busts necessarily, but just the big models. So that's something to keep an eye out for. I'm going to double check that. So I will put a link down below to both their Patreon page and their My Mini Factory page. If you're curious about this stuff, do take a look. It is always nice to see up and coming modelers doing what they do best. With that said, this has been High Lord Tamberlane with Obscurities and Miniatures. Saying thanks for watching, and we will see you back here soon. Bye-bye.